welcome to Something Great, a show where we discuss communities, the people who are in them, the people who lead them, and what keeps them vibrant and healthy. I'm your host, Brittany. I'm the Chief Discovery Officer, and I'm excited to chat with you today. Today, David Pinnock and Sunny Katsianis from Idaho Falls Zoo join us. Both are truly excited about the conservation work they are responsible for at the zoo, as well as educating the public they work with about how they can be part of the conservation community as well. Together, along with the rest of their incredible zoo staff, they are working to create an informed community who values the world around them. Hi, and welcome to Something Great. Today I'm here with my co-host, Clayne Lambert.
Hello.
And we are here with our friends from the zoo. Can you introduce yourselves?
Yes, I'm Sunny Katsianis. I'm the Public Engagement Curator for the Idaho Falls Zoo.
And I am David Pinnock. I'm the Executive Director of the best little zoo in the West, the Idaho Falls Zoo.
This really is one of the best zoos. We've loved it. Our family has loved it for years. So we're really excited to be here today. And we're going to start with a few icebreaker questions. Clayne, do you want to start?
I would be happy to. So what personality trait has gotten you in the most trouble?
Oh.
Whose personality trait?
Well, I was just going to say that, but mine for him for mine, ours for ourselves.
As you choose.
Well, I would probably say my outspokenness. Definitely. Yeah, that's probably one that... it's been at least 5 minutes since I've gotten in trouble for that one. So, hey, we'll go with that.
Outspokenness. I think all zoo people are very passionate people. And that's a big quality, really pays off in our line of work. But it can be a liability as well. You feel strongly about something, you express yourself clearly and loudly. And sometimes that's appropriate, maybe not always. So I suspect it's the same for me, is passion. Okay.
Okay, so our next question, do you play Wordle? And if you do, what is your starting word on Wordle?
I do not. And a lot of my friends do on Facebook. I see the weird little, calendar chart, whatever that, what was it called?
Wordle?
It's the little report that they post. And I'm dying to know what it means, but at the same time, I am one of those people that when I see something that everybody else is doing, it tends to make me not want to do something. And so I kind of want to be the Wordle holdout. However, there's the new one with music that I think sounds really interesting, and I've been wanting to try that out, but I haven't downloaded it yet.
What about you, David?
No, I'm sorry. I know almost nothing about it as well. I'll see it pop up at various places, and I just glance over it immediately and go on to the next thing.
Perfect. Totally fair.
So I don't know anything about it.
If you want to know a secret, I don't play it either. But I'm secretly envious of people who do because I love word games. So
they are fun. That is true.
All right. So, my background is in higher education. So what degree do you regret not pursuing in college?
I think I'm happy with where I'm at. I actually, believe it or not. My education, I was pre-veterinary medicine my entire undergraduate career. And when I was a senior, I was only about 2-3 months away from graduating. And I made the decision with my family at the time. I was married and I decided not to go to vet school. Decided I didn't want to take on that debt. Decided it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. And so I went to the career office at Idaho State University and said, okay, so I'm graduating with this degree in zoology here in a couple of months. What other career options are available to me when I've been focusing for the last 4.5-5 years on pre-veterinary medicine? When I can track a red blood cell through the body, what is that going to buy me for a future career besides being a veterinarian? And they looked at me, the gal I'll never forget looked at me, and she handed me a 6-inch binder that was completely full, and she says, so zoology, is that like working in zoos? Because there's a job at the Idaho Falls Zoo. Well, at that time we were Taufus Park Zoo. Mm-hmm. And would that be something you'd be interested in? Maybe. And so I don't regret a thing with my undergraduate career, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
What degree do I regret not getting? I guess I'd say all the degrees that are available that I didn't get. I just loved being at the university. It's just a magical place. An associate's degree in European history. Whatever it happens to be, it's just such a magical place where all of the knowledge of the world is there available to you. And if I could afford it, I think I'd spend my whole life at the university. I just think it's one of the magical places that are available to us. So I'd go and go and go with it. I almost did anyway, so.
That is fantastic, and I love it. All right, when you're trying to get pumped up and excited for the day, what is your get pumped up song?
Oh, wow. Believe it or not, I'm a big heavy metal fan.
Yes.
And so I would probably have to say I love Volbeat, and that call out, that let's get ready to rumble. I love that. That's got to be my jam.
I'd say Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix. That is one great song. That one, or perhaps, I'd say Woodstock by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, the Joni Mitchell song. That's another great pump-up song. I'd say those were my two favorites. Honky Tonk Woman, Rolling Stones, there's another good one. We go on and on. Yeah, those are some.
This is good. Yes.
There's a lot of great ones.
If you could see, and I guess this connects with that, if you could see one artist in concert, who would that be, or have you seen them already?
Oh, for me, it's The Cure. I'm a huge Robert Smith Cure fan, and I've seen him twice, and it was my dream because in the 80s, I was the emo goth child, and I tell you what, just The Cure they were my thing. And of course, at that time, in the 80s, the bands didn't travel like they do now. They stayed predominantly in Europe, or they came to the United States, to the big cities. So I'll never forget when I read that they were coming to Salt Lake City for the first time. And I was like, oh, I am there. And so I've seen them twice since. Yeah.
Okay.
That's exciting.
I would say there's someone that I always wished that I saw. He is now passed, sadly, is the great banjo player Earl Scruggs. Mm-hmm. He's one of the bluegrass musicians that I didn't get a chance to see before he passed. I really regret that. In fact, just not only a year ago, I was at his childhood home in North Carolina, admiring the spot where he grew up. Though someone else lives there now. It's not a shrine or anything, but I just drove by. And I wish that I would have seen him play before he passed.
All right, very last funny question, or lighthearted question, and then we'll get into the serious stuff. What's the last series you watched on television that you loved? And this is assuming that you have time to watch television.
Well, right now I'm watching Gilded Age on HBO, and I am really enjoying it. I have to say, one of my go-tos is The Marvelous Miss Maisel on Amazon Prime. I have not enjoyed this season as much. I feel like the writers are kind of running out of stuff for Mrs. Maisel to do. But I really am loving the Gilded Age.
As soon as I started watching that, you can tell Julian Fellows is involved because
Yes.
it's the music. It's the little scene music that makes me think of Downton Abbey. It totally connects with it.
Right? And I have to say, Downton Abbey is my favorite series of all time. Followed closely by The Crown. I really have enjoyed The Crown. But Downton Abbey...
We binged the first one in one night. We stayed up until like 3 o'clock in the morning, and we just kind of stumbled across it, and I just couldn't stop.
Right.
And my wife would look at me and say, are we done? No. We're not done yet. We're going to finish it. So, David, what about you?
I don't know. The last series I saw that I really enjoyed, I don't know, the Flintstones, perhaps. Jetsons. The Crown was one I enjoyed. It's not like I haven't seen any of them, but I think that's the last one I really
connected
afterwards went, that was really worth my time watching. That was really good. Okay. Really well done.
Well, thank you for taking the time to answer our fun questions. And now I want to do a different kind of fun. I want to talk with you about the Idaho Falls Zoo. So let's maybe first start out. You introduced us to yourselves with your title. Tell me a little bit about what your jobs entail here at the zoo and what brought you here. And we kind of heard, Sunny, some of yours, that it was like just kismet. It sounds like that it was, there just happened to be a job here when you were looking.
Yeah, it worked out for whatever reason. And it's by no means the job that I am still in. It was a seasonal position actually in our children's zoo, taking care of the sheep and the goats and the donkey and so forth down there. And it was so much fun. I fell in love. I knew that I had a passion for wildlife, and like I said, I felt like it was going to be in a veterinary sense. And that when I changed my mind, I thought, gosh, what am I going to do with this? What's going to happen? And then shortly after that seasonal position ended, I actually applied for the zoo's first year-round education position back in 1998, believe it or not. Wow. And I haven't spent my entire time at the zoo, actually. I was gone doing other things for a decade, but like David was talking about, we're a passionate bunch that loves working with wildlife and that loves working in zoological facilities. And that, I think, is what drew me back, that I felt like my true passion was here. And my position now has grown into the people part of the zoo. And so, I report directly to the executive director, and I oversee all the people aspects of the zoo. Everything from education to volunteers to supporting development, fundraising, sponsorships, and guest services. That's a big one that I took on in the last year that I really didn't have any experience with, to be honest with you. And so it was a new challenge. It was very challenging, but it was very exciting. And it's great to have that connection, to see people from the moment they walk into the zoo to how they have their educational experience with the zoo, to who they interact with the zoo. Because really, honestly, coming to zoos and aquariums, coming to cultural organizations, it's a people experience. You may be there to come and see wildlife and learn about wildlife, but you're really coming to spend time with people that you love. You're coming to explore your community and the facilities in your community, and you have a connection with that. If you don't want to come and see that, you're not going to be coming to see that. So you have an interest. And so it's really great to see that people connection, and I don't think that we can ever take that for granted, because that's a sole reason why we exist.
I love that. David, tell me all about the things that you do.
Well, to put it in a nutshell, I'm responsible for everything, which means my main job is to make sure that the staff at the zoo can do their job. So do they have the resources to do their job? Do they understand the mission clearly? Do they know what we're trying to accomplish, so that they know how to spend their day and how not to spend their day? Do they know where to go when they need assistance or trouble? Do we have the finances? It's a huge one.
Yeah.
So I would say my main job is to make sure everybody can do their jobs well, which means I spend my time doing a surprisingly wide variety of things, whatever is needed. So a lot of my time is looking for money. A lot of my time is administrating and helping with the staff, and having meetings and make sure they know what they do. But then I'm spending plenty of time at the end of a shovel here at the zoo and, clearing walks or whatever is needed to make sure that things go forward smoothly, quickly, and productively. I need to make sure that happens. And then what brought me to the zoo, was the other question?
What brought you here?
Unlike Sunny, I'm actually very new to zoos, so I'm just coming up on 6 years. Before I moved to the zoo, never did I imagine myself working at a zoo. Not that I was opposed to it or anything, it just never entered my mind. I just couldn't imagine that would be a career path for me. But when the opportunity came up, I grabbed onto it eagerly. Because, what is a zoo? A zoo's about wildlife and about the conservation of wildlife. And we're at a time where that is a very immediate and important issue that we need to grapple with. So to be at a place that not only grapples with those questions, but has access to a wide audience, to think that you can have an impact on someone where they come into the zoo for one reason and they leave thinking about wildlife, the conservation issues that are associated with wildlife, and how it is that they move through their lives and how it impacts wildlife. That is a great blessing to someone like me, to be able to spend their professional life doing something that in my mind matters. That's just a satisfying thing to do, and not everybody gets that chance in their professional life. So I'm very, very lucky.
You know, Sonny, it's funny you were mentioning how the human aspect of the zoo sometimes gets overlooked, but there are no barriers in front of the penguin display.
Right.
It's amazing. Whatever age, it doesn't matter. It's always okay to talk to complete strangers
Yep.
in front of penguins. I don't know what it is about those animals specifically, but you're right. There is this thing that as we experience this, it is a communal experience. You don't just go to the zoo and isolate yourself. This isn't like an art museum where it's all about personal experience. It's about shared experience.
Yes, definitely.
And so I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that's a fantastic revisioning of what a zoo is, because I think a lot of people have that in their mind of, well, you just go there to see the animals, and that's not really what it is.
No, that's just part of the experience. If that's all you've done, we haven't done a good job, to, like David said, to get you thinking, to get you curious, to get you interacting with your neighbors, to get you interacting with somebody who, we're on the pathway to Yellowstone National Park, so we see a large number of tourists, to get to interact with somebody who's from a different state or a different country, or has different experiences from you, I think is a very, very rewarding part of coming and visiting zoos and aquariums, because we are all in this together, whether we are a swimming animal, an upright walking on two legs animal, or a crawling, slithering across the ground or up a tree animal.
Yeah. And it's amazing how much animals can be windows into other places.
Definitely, yeah.
Even though they have been maybe moved from the location, they are so evocative of where they're from. And so when you're walking in front of those spaces, it almost teleports you to that location where they're from, and that helps increase our level of compassion to people, that we can start to understand what it must be like seeing this animal. You gain a compassion for the people and the geography of the place where they're from. And it's amazing that a zoo can transport you to so many places in just one small location. It's not an isolated thing. You're looking at the animal, you're reading this thing, you're starting to understand, and it's incredible to me how that increases our awareness.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The opportunity to do that is sure potent. There's nowhere like a zoo to be able to start those kind of conversations. How well we do it is something we're really evaluating right now. You talk about that potential of a zoo to teleport you to another spot, to start a conversation with your neighbor about life and living and sharing the planet with other organisms and all of those things. There's nowhere like a zoo that can start that. Do we do it as good as we could do it? We don't. Not yet. But we're working very hard to try to increase the potential of those conversations happening. And not only for having the conversations happen, but to have them in a way that impacts the visitors such that when they go home, they keep thinking about it.
Well, and that's such a unique mission for, I feel like, this particular zoo. You put a lot of thought and a lot of planning into how to create empathetic experiences for zoogoers so that they can connect with animals, not in ways where we humanize animals,
Right.
but where we understand animals. Do you want to talk a little bit about Ace for Wildlife and all of the things that you're a part of to really try and change the way that humans see their relationships with animals?
Yeah, this really is a new thing. Within the last 20 years that I've been involved with the zoo, I remember starting out in the industry where it was not only uncommon, but it was really kind of not acceptable for you to identify these wild animals by, let's say, by a name. Because it was, in our minds at that time, inappropriately anthropomorphizing these animals. I remember getting an F on a paper in college because my comparative vertebrate anatomy teacher, I had said something about the way that, it appeared when I was watching this animal, it may have been feeling this way. Animals don't have feelings, F automatically. And we've really kind of looked back at that specifically in the last just 4 or 5 years, believe it or not, and talked more about, well, we're animals. they've got unique experiences. We've got unique experiences. Isn't it time we kind of understand each other's unique experiences and explore that and what that means for cohesive living on our planet and how that plays a role? The zookeepers here, and in many zoos, they've known these animals for years. They recognize that these animals have unique and different personalities. One penguin doesn't act the exact same as another penguin. We don't act the same as each other. You know, we do have some uniqueness, and this program that the ACE, Advancing Conservation through Empathy for Wildlife, that we've been involved with this last 3 years, is really exploring that. What does that mean? Because like David said, historically, zoos have been science centers, if you will. Accredited zoos have been science centers. And that's great. But we as a species don't live our lives looking at scientific knowledge and going, oh, well, yes, that's exactly how we should all be acting because science says so. We are an emotional beast.
Yeah, and so moving beyond this objective experience of I'm just here to observe the creature, we have 2 cats at home, and do not tell me those cats don't have personality.
And they're very different personalities, right? They're very unique individuals.
And I think that the act of observing other animals as beings, maybe not sentient beings, but beings, allows us to connect with them in ways that humanize us and create a more qualitative experience rather than just this objective, like you said, scientific perspective. It's healing. I mean, watch a puppy video on YouTube. People respond emotionally to that. I love the fact that the zoo is trying to expand that to help us to, because we've domesticated certain creatures and we identify with them, that's okay. But that experience can be so much broader and more inclusive of the totality of life rather than just this, how we live our, what we kind of consider our domesticated life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's very important, of course, to us that we don't inappropriately assign human-like characteristics to these animals, of course. It's a very fine line that you're walking, because what we don't want to encourage is we don't want to encourage you to come here and we tell you all about Hondo, our amazing male lion, and you go, I want one, I'm going to get one as a pet. That is the last thing we want. That is not that at all what our mission or our goal is. We want you to see Hondo as a unique individual who is a vulnerable species, who's here thanks to the fact that the zoo and really amazing adequate animal welfare and health care exists. He was partially raised by a dog. Well, what a unique story, and the dog has a story in and of her own. And we want you to look at those things and we want you to go, wow, I've had some shared experiences. Without this intervention, Hondo wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. Most of the animals, of course, nowadays are born in accredited zoos. And, you have to look at that from a standpoint of they don't have wild experiences. Well, guess what, folks? We don't really have wild experiences either. And so we can have those shared experiences and we can identify with progression through life as these animals are going and their likes and their dislikes. And by looking at that animal, for example, Hondo the lion, and saying, okay, well, here's his experience. And, he is an amazing, the reason why, we take care of all of our animals, but the reason why he's so critical to his species is he represents some very unique genetics that could possibly help his future species to be diverse and to ensure the survival of African lions. And what does that mean for us? Well, that's a fun story to tell. That's a really unique position to think about. Like David said, when you walk away and you go, wow, he's a really cool lion, but he's a very genetically unique lion, and that really means some great things for the conservation of this species. I want to learn more about what kind of conservation efforts are going on in Africa, in lion habitat. What can I do to help this? And so I think that's a key component of what we're trying to do is make you think and make you feel, make you have that emotional connection that you're going to carry on with you after you leave.
Can I mention one last thing about this?
Please.
This empathy question is a really important one. First, because as Sonny was just saying and implied in your questions and your statements, is that it's just the facts. It's not an emotional issue that animals have their own way of perceiving the world, and they feel things, and that's beyond dispute for a lot of the animals that we know and love. And so it's a better representation of what that individual animal actually is as a living thing. So there's that first. It's just not an emotional manipulation, it's accurate. The second thing, though, that drives this so much for us is that the challenge is so big. Wildlife is having such a difficult time during our time right now. It's a bigger problem than we as a society or as communities have really realized yet. And so while we're even coming to a realization of how big the problem is, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And so as an organization that sees itself as one of its main missions is to make sure people understand that, it becomes really important to us to say, well, when you came to our zoo, did you understand that or didn't you understand that? And if people aren't understanding it at the level that we think we can, that doesn't reach our potential of delivering that message, we've got to figure out a better way of doing it. And in my opinion, zoos in general have not done it as well as we could. And so if looking at the animal more clearly with this empathetic approach that's not only accurate, but connects people to wildlife more potently, we've got to explore it. That's our job. This is us trying to do our job better. And we believe that there's a really high probability that by taking this approach that people's experience at the zoo is better. The more likelihood that they leave thinking about conservation and the challenges that wildlife face is higher. That's our job, so that's what we're going to do.
Fantastic. I'm so excited to talk some more about conservation as a whole and what specific measures this incredible zoo is taking towards conservation, and we'll do that right after our break.
If you've ever wanted a backyard flock, now's the time. It's chick days at the feed mill. From now until May, you can find chicks in all shapes and sizes. Chickens, quail, chucker, and even pheasant. With their super helpful staff and store full of everything you need, there's no better place to find your new feathery friend than the Meridian Feed Mill. See you there.
We are, as a reminder, here with Sunny Katsianis and David Pennock from the zoo today, and we have been talking about empathy for wild animals, and something we're going to move into is conservation. Conservation is a very loaded word in some circles, and I'm curious, when you think of conservation, what does that mean? What does it entail?
Well, for me personally, I think it means being good stewards for our planet, being a key player in our role in our planet. Not that it means not affecting our planet, because, just the fact that we're here and animals are here and plants are here, every living thing on this planet has its own impact. But I think conservation looks at it more from a standpoint of appropriate impact and not inhibiting other species from living out their lives the best that we want to live out our lives. For me, that's a big part of conservation. And so I never feel like people should ever be taken out of that equation. The idea of a pristine, untouched wilderness, it doesn't exist on our planet, and it hasn't for many years. And so I think that that's a key part of it is kind of just being thoughtful and living with meaning.
What does conservation mean? For me, it's a recognition of how much you matter as an individual. Every person matters, and what you do matters. The decisions that you make matter. They have impact on the people around you. They have an impact on the wildlife around you. That has an impact on your community. It has an impact on everything. Every person matters. And every species matters. Kind of what Sunny was alluding to. That's the basic lesson of ecology, is that we're all tied to each other. So for me, conservation is a statement about me recognizing that I matter. So I should make a conscious decision about what I'm doing or not doing. I should be conservative about my quality of life and lifestyle. I'm going to think about it and not just run willy-nilly doing whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want. I'm going to stop and think about it. I'm going to be conservative about it and go, if I make this decision, these are the impacts. If I make the other decision, these are the impacts. Which is the better decision for me as an individual and my family, for my community, and for the other living things that I share the planet with, and making a conscious decision. And I'd say that that's the biggest thing that's lacking. You know, as we rush so hurriedly in this life we've created for ourselves, so many things are happening without us just not stopping and going, what's happening? It's not the zoo's job to tell everybody exactly what to do and how they should treat wildlife or not wildlife, and you should do this and that. But our job is to give you a clear view of the facts and the impact that you have with your decisions, so you can make an educated decision about the life that you live and the impact, a conscious impact that you're going to have on other people and other living things that you share the planet with, because you do. And if you don't think about it, those impacts are going to happen anyway, and you're going to look back and go, gee whiz, I wish I would have stopped and thought and made a conscious decision about what I'm doing instead of just rushing forward without any thought for the impact of what I'm doing.
And that is important, because a lot of people feel like it doesn't matter if I do plastic bags. Everybody else is doing it. If I stop using plastic bags, it won't make any difference. But it does.
It makes a big, big difference. You know, people think of wildlife. They think of, like they come to the zoo and they get introduced to a red-ruffed lemur from Madagascar, and they learn about the conservation and what they can do to help red-ruffed lemurs. That's a big deal. But if we're doing our job right, you should be looking at a red-ruffed lemur and going, wow, what does that mean for me interacting with the wildlife in my backyard, or at the national park, or along the river walk, or the pollinators that are going through my yard, or whatever the case may be. We're surrounded by wildlife all the time. Conservation is a decision about red-ruffed lemurs. It's also a decision about mason bees flying around in your backyard. And once we realize that we're part of this broad community of living things, and what I do matters to the other living things around me, there it is. That's what conservation is about, is forcing that recognition, discussion, and decision.
Everywhere you look, you'll see recommendations about conservation. And you just brought up this question about, or Brittany brought up the idea of plastic bags versus recyclable bags. Simple things and much more involved type things that people can do. I really appreciated, David, how you talked about, I can hear about the red-ruffed lemur, which is such an exotic, faraway place. And so therefore, my actions here can't possibly affect the environment or the habitat over there. So it doesn't really matter what I do here. But the recognition is that we still live in a habitat here. So the question that I'd like to maybe ask are, what are some steps that you see that perhaps people in Idaho Falls or in our local community, things that are realistic that somebody might be able to do to engage in this kind of mindful conservation that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that you can do. As simple as putting up a bird feeder. Right now is a great time because the migratory birds are coming back, right? Ensuring that you don't have something dangerous in your environment that might, hurt an animal that's coming through, like a migratory animal of some sort, like a bird. Mark your windows and things like that, they making small things like that. But I think in the bigger picture, you do need to think about, well, where did that plastic bag come from? Where did the petroleum come from that plastic bag is made out of? How much did that cost to ship that plastic bag from where it was made of to us? We're all in a position right now where we're thinking a lot about petroleum and gasoline and how it's going to, oil reserves and how that's going to affect us personally. Think about that in the bigger picture of how does that impact your choice to say no straws. Again, straws are made of plastic, which is made of the petroleum products, which is shipped to us across oceans, which, came from a country that may not be able to afford that a natural place is impacted by that pulling out of that resource from our earth. Everything we do has an impact. And I think it's just those little things, like I said, providing appropriate habitat, building, planting a few trees in your yard that are appropriate to your area. That's a huge thing that we need to think of. We are in southeastern Idaho. We are in the middle of a high plains desert. What are appropriate plants for our area? And there's a lot of local greenhouses that can help out with that. But what will attract local wildlife in an appropriate way? And I think it's that thinking of the appropriate matters of doing things. We always hear don't leave your food out if you live in a wild forested area because the grizzly bears are waking up. That's conservation. That is appropriately living with wildlife, making the choice that, okay, all I have to do is make sure that my fridge is locked up before I leave my cabin for the winter are done correctly. I think also thinking bigger than yourself, kind of getting out of that mindset of, I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. You have no right to tell me what to do. It would be nice if people would instead think of ways, well, what can I do? Like David said, what impact do I have? How can I be a more conservative liver? How do I live thoughtfully? Recognizing that we're part of a bigger piece of the puzzle and that, the small things we do today will save the red ruff lemurs of tomorrow. Believe it or not, here in southeastern Idaho, everything you do has an impact.
Being a more thoughtful liver. How could you do better than that? That kind of
Is that a word? Is liver a word?
Unfortunately, I think of onions and just...
I know, right?
That's what I was thinking of.
From childhood.
That's exactly what I was... Just a good, healthy liver. What is it that we can do? And it's relatively easy to read a little bit and browse a little bit on the internet, and there's a long list of very practical things that you can do that really help, just like what Sunny said. And of course, one-use plastics are a big one that she kind of mentioned, and there's a lot of things. And this maybe is a little repetitive from what I said before, but I think it's just so important, is that I think the number one thing we could do, the big step we could take that we haven't taken yet completely, is to recognize the reality of the situation. I don't believe we have. And the reality of the situation is my actions have an impact. And they have an impact here locally with the wildlife around me, as we talked about. But it does have an impact on red-ruffed lemurs. And it has impact all over the world. What I do matters. How our climate is changing and things like that. It's impossible to look at the facts and not realize that I am connected to the entire planet. I'm dependent on that planet, and I have an impact on that planet, and my decisions have an impact. If we could just grapple with that one issue and just really realize it and internalize it, I can't save the whole earth by myself. I bring my little shopping bag and don't use the plastics. It's a great thing, but I'm not going to save the planet by myself. That's true. But what I can do still matters a lot. It matters. And just morally speaking, once I recognize that I am connected to the whole planet, all the people on the earth and all the living things on the earth, then I can put my actions into a new context. What's the information I'm going to use to make my decision? Well, if I see myself for the reality of the situation that I'm in, if I really see the facts for what they are, then I can see more clearly and make a better decision for me. And I would say that that's the number one big thing, is just understanding, again, that I matter and what I do matters and impacts others of all species in a very big way. The next thing that I'd say is that we have to realize the reality of the situation that our world's wildlife is in. And it's not just an endangered species issue, or this animal's going extinct or that animal's going extinct. That's big, that's huge. But even our common species, all species are decreasing on average through time. So even the species that aren't on an endangered species list, their populations on average are decreasing dramatically, quickly. The example I like to use is if you just take my adult lifetime from the time you're mentioning the university, the time I was in the university till now, situation for wildlife has changed dramatically just in that short time. On average, if you went anywhere on the planet and just picked a random species of wildlife somewhere, you just plopped yourself in the middle of Asia somewhere and picked some toad to look at or whatever, the probability would be that in my adult lifetime, there would be 60% fewer of that toad than there was when I was at the university. 60% fewer. So to try to envision that, if you piled up all the wildlife when I was going to school and looked at that big pile, and then you did it again today, it would be 60% smaller. And that's combining all the animals, common, uncommon, whatever. If that continues, you begin to stop and go, oh my, we really are having a big impact on the wildlife around us and all over the world. What does that mean to me? How should I respond to that? What does it make sense to me to respond to those facts? If we as a zoo can make you think that, we're not going to tell you your answer to that. Hopefully we can give you some options, but that's for everybody to decide. They've got their own set of values and political beliefs and whatever it may be. But right now they're deciding without the full set of facts, not realizing this big impact that they're having, maybe not realizing their connectivity to all the other living things on the planet and how what they do makes an impact. So I would say the two big things we could do is to recognize the reality of the situation, our connectedness to everything else. And then two, to recognize the situation that the world's wildlife is in right now. It's critical and it's drastic. It's a crisis. And we've got to confront it and then decide how to do it, how we're going to respond. But not recognizing it and not making a decision is, in my view, immoral. It's just not appropriate. Whatever decision you make, that's up to you. To just let it happen without making a decision at all just does not seem appropriate.
To abdicate our responsibility for the consequences of our choices.
Exactly.
I teach ethics.
Oh.
And so everything you're talking about is the things that I'm just pleading with my students to acknowledge. I'm not going to, because this is a public forum and stuff, but I just want to swear sometimes when I'm listening to what you're saying of just, Sonny, you were talking about, think about how that straw or that single-use plastic bag got here. Well, what happens to it after I've used it?
Exactly. It doesn't end when it gets into our homes. No.
You were talking about common animals, and I think about bees. And I think about the collapse of bees across the country. And I hear about this because we live in a somewhat rural agricultural environment that you might not hear it in a lot of other places. But you start to conceptualize what would happen if the bee population completely collapsed. And what are the expanding consequences of that. I really appreciated, David, what you were talking about. But how important it is to recognize when we say morality or ethics, we're just talking about how do we act so that we can live with the consequences. We're not talking about spirituality or right or wrong per se, as much as how do we live so that we can handle the consequences of our actions. It can feel like we live in a world where we are being called upon to have to make those decisions all the time, everywhere. Do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? Do I do this? And it gets so convoluted because we attach all of these other things to that decision. Our politics, our ideology, our standing. But I appreciate that you're saying, let's take a step back from that for just a minute and recognize that the actions that we take have so much power that if we do take control of that power, I can affect the red-ruffed lemur, but I can also improve the way my own little biome of my home works.
I think that's such an excellent point. And your example of wearing masks, I think, is such a perfect one I hadn't thought of before. It's really a great analogy. Should I wear a mask or not wear a mask? Well, that is a raging argument, and it's usually a political argument or an ideological argument. Why isn't, I'm a member of a community, what's the right thing for me to do? That's generally not why we're making the decision. We're making the decision for these bigger questions that are important questions and questions we should argue about and talk about. But we should be talking about what's the right thing for me to do as a member of a community, and how do my actions impact my neighbor? That should be the first thing, and then these political issues, and that's very analogous to the wildlife thing. Conservation, it's exactly the same thing. Politics matter, ideology matters, religion and spirituality matters. All these things play into people's decisions and things that we should be discussing and in some cases arguing about, and all of those things. I applaud it. but they should be based first on what's my decision as an individual that I think is the right thing for me to do based on the facts. Then we'll decide the politics. Then we'll decide this. How does it fit in with that and that? But I can't leave that first decision out. If I do that, I'm abdicating my responsibility to talking heads that tell me what to do politically or whatever. Right. And that's just something we can't do.
And that's when we lose our power and we lose the ability to connect with everything around us.
Next, we're going to talk about the zoo's larger role in the community. And I'm excited to talk about that right after a quick break.
Have you heard our first podcast? If you haven't, make sure that you give it a listen. We talked to author Mario McCracken about his amazing new book, Really Care for Them. You definitely want to add this to your bookshelf, and we have great news for you. It's currently available on pretty much every trusted book website. So go check out Really Care for Them on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Powell's.
We are excited to be back for our last segment with the zoo. And one thing that I really wanted to talk to you about is zoos are really a part of a larger conservation community. But this zoo specifically does some really fantastic conservation work. I would love for you to share about that and then talk to us about what it takes to run programs like that. Because I think that there's a discrepancy between, I know there was for me before I got to get to know my zoo friends better, the idea of what a zoo does versus what it actually does.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the global programs. I'll let David talk a little bit about the local
Whatever
programs.
you'd like, Sunny.
Yeah,
of course.
let's do that. Yeah, we started probably about, it's probably been 6 or 7 years ago now. And we went to an AZA conference, Association of Zoos and Aquariums. We're an accredited member, and we're very proud of that. And we encourage everybody that visits, zoos and aquariums and animal facilities to look for that mark of excellence, because that's an important thing. But anyways, let's go back to conservation. The president of AZA at the time, it's usually a local member that's president, and at that time it was Steve Burns, who was the director at Zoo Boise for quite a few years. And he stood up in front of us and says, we're not doing what we should be doing, folks. We're getting money from our public and we're caring for the animals in our care, but we're not making the biggest impact, and that's conservation. So I would challenge you to look at how you can raise money for conservation, because, and we've heard this for years, as an AZA community, we see more visitors than all the professional sports attendance combined in a year. And I apologize, numbers are not coming to mind. Maybe David can help me out with a few of those numbers of what they are, but we see a lot of people and we see a huge diversity of people. Those people are what we're trying to encourage to look at these conservation issues that we've been talking about, right? They're the prime audience, and we're seeing millions of them. What can we do as an industry, basically? And so a lot of zoos, with the leadership of Zoo Boise, started what we call kind of a coins for conservation or quarters for conservation or whatever you want to call it. We started one as well, and that is a fee that we charge on top of our regular admission fee. Keep in mind, it's a fee. No, it's not a choice. If you come to the zoo, you are going to become a conservation agent and pay this fee, and that money goes toward several local and global entities. And our conservation fee is 50 cents. 25% of that stays locally, which, like I said, David will talk about a little bit about. 25 cents of that gets divvied up as the visitor chooses in a little voting booth that we have at the zoo. And you can choose AZA's Penguin Safe program that helps support African penguins. You can choose to support young women's education in a very poor country, Mozambique, through the Gorongosa Restoration Project. And then the Snow Leopard Trust, which is actually an American-based organization, but they go into the countries where the snow leopards live and help teach the people how to live in harmony with the snow leopards, so that people are able to feed their families, that people are able to live in a very difficult environment. It's not easy to live in the high altitudes of Pakistan and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. but how you can do it in harmony with snow leopards, a large predator that's living in your community. We see that a lot, that the people are excited. I didn't get my token, give me my token, and then at the end of each season, we allocate the tokens appropriately based on the amount of money we received from that token is equals, like I said, that 25 cents goes to those global organizations. So like I said, when people come to the zoo, they become, maybe unknowingly, but they become conservation agents for not only local but global conservation entities as well.
Yeah, so I want to mention one thing about what she said, especially with the Snow Leopard Trust, but with other organizations, is that I think it's important to point out is that one of the difficulties with the conservation discussion is that it's often expressed as, I'm making a choice between wildlife and people. Well, I choose people. And so the wildlife are going to have to take it on the chin because I want people to thrive. And what we find out with almost every conservation effort, that is a false choice. It's just not true. That we can have people and wildlife, but it takes conscious choices. And the Snow Leopard Trust, as she just mentioned, how people, analogous to here with our own predators, ranchers have their cattle and their sheep and a mountain lion or a grizzly bear or a wolf, and how difficult and challenging that is. The same thing as in Central Asia with the snow leopards. Well, that's what the Snow Leopard Trust does, is just go and say, well, if you did it like this and did it like that, you can have your livestock and you can have snow leopards. We have to make an adjustment, but we can have both in many instances. We should forget about it's a us versus them sort of discussion. So I just had to throw that in. So as Sunny mentioned, half of the money that we raise for conservation goes locally right here. It's about our backyard as well. And Idaho is extraordinarily blessed with an abundance of wildlife. We live in an extraordinary place. The opportunities to interact with wildlife is great. So the conservation opportunities in Idaho are extraordinary. The two that we're working on right now are some wonderful ones. The first one are bats. Bats in eastern Idaho are under a couple of very difficult threats that we could talk about sometime. And the importance of bats to the natural ecology and to our agricultural industry is huge. And so as these threats looming, mainly white nose syndrome, but other things as well, the conservation of bats has become a very, very important thing. And so we've started to raise money to fund research to study the bats in eastern Idaho, which there are some great researchers working on it, but there's a void of information about bats. And so we're funding conservation research on the bat communities of eastern Idaho and have some wonderfully associated educational opportunities, particularly Bat Night. Get on our website when Bat Night comes, sign up for Bat Night quick because it sells out every time and you won't regret it. The second local conservation project that we work on is this extraordinary little beetle. So we were talking about bees before. You start looking at the wildlife locally and you'll see how diverse and amazing the wildlife is, even in your neighborhood parks and such. But one of them, of course, are insects, which a lot of the ecology everywhere is based on. And we have here in eastern Idaho a voracious predator, an insect beetle, a little predaceous beetle called the St. Anthony Dunes tiger beetle, that exists nowhere on the planet except on a few little dunes here in eastern Idaho and one tiny little population in southwestern Montana. And it is beautiful to look at if you get a chance to look at one. They've got these enormous big jaws that are terrifying, and they fly along the dunes, looking for their prey. They're like a cougar or a lion or something. They're like a tiger. They're a tiger beetle, right? And these things lay their eggs. They live in a very desolate place on sand, so there's not a lot of food. They lay their eggs. Their larva drills into the sand and builds a little hole and sits in that sand, and it eventually turns into an adult beetle. It takes them 4 years. They sit in that little tunnel for 4 years to wait to get enough food to mature into an adult beetle and then hover around chasing other things. They're really quite extraordinary, very beautiful, and almost nothing is known about them. And so this is one of our local wildlife species that's very endemic to our area of the planet. And so we're funding research to understand more about those tiger beetles. Sand dunes are huge recreational resources as well. So we want to make sure to manage ourselves in a way that protects everything, including our recreational opportunities. And so we're funding research to be able to understand the tiger beetle better.
You know, one of the things that I have to say that I've been thinking a lot about during this entire conversation is again, I'm from an educational background, and I don't think I go a day without hearing STEM. You know, science, technology, engineering, and math.
We love to call it STEAM.
Yeah,
we love to
because
put the art in the...
Don't forget the arts, you know, because I have a humanities background, so that's
right?
important. But I keep hearing the STEM. But one of the things that I realize that a zoo does is that you operationalize science in such an accessible way. I think so many people, when they hear of science, they think of people in white lab coats who work in some remote place, but a zoo is a living, breathing science manifestation in a community.
Thank you for that. I think a perfect example is Bat Night. I mean, it is so cool to see these little kids showing up in Batman costumes and these people that are curious because maybe they've got bats in their attic, or, you know, we often see kind of the black clad goth group that comes and they're children of the night, you know what I mean? And it is such a diverse event, and to come and all everybody wants to do is they want to see or learn about bats because they're fascinating, they're unknown, they're, you know, and they get to go out into the zoo, and we set up these special receivers that allow them to hear the bats echolocating, which you can't do in nature. Like David said, it sells out every time. There is a curiosity, there is a desire in our community to learn that science, but to make that science fun. And, you know, starting out in this industry, STEM's kind of become a buzzword, like you said, in recent times. And we are a very science-based community, obviously. We see a lot of that in the Idaho Falls area. And there definitely a time when you'd go and you'd say, oh, because we can do these cool things. And look, we're bringing in 150,000 people in 6 months to experience the science and get passionate about it and learn about it. And they're like, yeah, but you're not real science. And you went, well, why? Why are we not, you know, we're like you said, we're bringing it to life. And they're like, well, prove it. And it's been great to see that evolution of how the zoo has been able to prove it, you know, and I think this conservation fundraising, if you will, this action that we're doing is a prime way that we're doing that. Not only are we providing funding, but we're providing space to do real science and real learning. You know, the bats, we found out that we have possibly one of the largest maternity roosts right here in the zoo in southeastern Idaho. We wouldn't have known that had we not done this valuable science work. And it's providing great information to the industry, to the sciences. They've been published several times. We've presented at an AZA conference. We presented at entomology conferences, worldwide entomology conferences, about what they found out about the tiger beetle. And it's the people that are doing that. Without the people, without the visitors, without the guests, without our community, we could have never done that.
In talking about the community and that they were involved, tell me, because Idaho Falls Zoo is a special zoo. It's beautifully landscaped, the animals are in impeccable shape, and beyond that, you're involved in real, true conservation efforts. But for the general public, what can they do to be part of the zoo family? What are some ways that others, you know, here in Idaho and even abroad, can choose to be a part of what you're doing here?
Well, of course, come visit the best little zoo in the West. See what we're doing. Give us feedback on what we're doing. You know, when you come, you become a conservation agent because you automatically pay that conservation fee and you become part of that. Another thing that we have a lot of people do from outside of the areas is buy a membership. Maybe you only come to the Idaho Falls Zoo once. Maybe you never come to the Idaho Falls Zoo. But because we are an accredited member of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, our membership, which has a conservation fee attached to it as well, based on the level of membership that you buy, is good at over 100 zoos, I think now, across the country, zoos and aquariums across the country. You're supporting the zoo, but you're also supporting conservation. Go to your accredited zoo, because these conservation efforts, these quarters for conservations, coins for conservation programs are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we'll never turn away a nice donation. Any little bit helps. A
In fact,
$5
we encourage
donation,
it.
yes, yeah, definitely, exactly. Any little bit helps. And if you want that money to go to conservation, you tell us, you let us know. And boy, we do that. We're working with a local second grade right now, and they are doing a conservation program. This will be the second year that they've done it. And we're working with them to make sure that these second graders have the biggest impact, have the biggest connection to what that means in their community. And they're raising money by selling goodies and doing fundraisers and things like that. And they're making a difference in their world, quarter at a time.
Well, we're running short on time, which is unfortunate because I feel like we could probably do 100 episodes of everything that you do here. But we like to end with something great. So I would love if each of you would share your something great with our audience.
Oh, wow. For me, I have to say again, I've been involved with the zoo for a long time. And when I hear students that come back to me that, I don't like to think about how old they are now, but they come back to me, they run into me at the zoo, or I'll see a parent or a grandparent or whatever. And they say, because of the zoo, because of the programs that you did at the zoo, so-and-so is now a wildlife biologist in the Brazilian rainforest, or so-and-so is now a veterinarian, or last summer, I had a gal come up to me. You probably don't remember me, and unfortunately I didn't. But, she says, 20 years ago, I was in your education programs. And so we buy an annual membership, and we come to the zoo at least once a week. And she had, several young children with her of varying ages. And so she's passing on what she learned. She says, I'm getting my kids enrolled in the classes, and, we love it, and we love the zoo. And it's that building of community that I've seen over the years that I think cannot be overlooked by the impact that it's having on our entire planet. We've talked a lot about how one person can make a difference and how everybody has an impact. And I think that's especially true, the impact that the zoo has on our community and how it's affecting the rest of the planet.
Well, boy, I'd sure agree with that. You watch the zoo have an impact on a young person or an old person or a family or whatever. That really is one of the great things about working here. And so since Sunny already stole that one, I'll maybe mention something a little bigger that inspires me, and that is how extraordinary the planet is that we live on. It's cliche to hear about it. You hear about these things over and over again, but if you really stop to think about it, the planet we live on is unbelievable. When you talk about these conservation things, it's always the bad news story, and that's a discussion we always need to keep alive and going. But sometimes we forget to stop and recognize how extraordinary it is, the world that we live on. Eastern Idaho is an unbelievable place. The planet is unbelievable. The biodiversity that's on our planet is so extraordinary. I was just telling Brittany earlier that I just started planting a few little flowers, native flowers in my yard, and noticing the different insects that came to them. And I'm astounded by the wide diversity of bees and wasps and flies and different things that mimic each other and are extraordinarily beautiful. And there they were in my yard all the time. I didn't even notice. And to think that there's probably 10 or 11 million species that aren't even identified by science yet. It's just astounding to think about. And then the big thing, and again, this may sound a little cliche, maybe it is, but I just find it so extraordinary every time I think about it, is you just think of this planet that we live on, this little ball that's floating through space, brings in no resources. It doesn't import anything except the energy from the sun. That's the only resource we get, is the energy from the sun. That's it. And nothing leaves. We don't export our wastes. We don't export anything. Think of your house. Living in your house, you can't bring in anything but sunshine, and nothing can leave through pipes or through garbage cans or anything. That's what our planet is. And think of how extraordinary that is, that all of these people, all of these species, all of these plants, this extraordinary dense film of life that lives on our planet is able to thrive and grow with just that system of just light going in and taking care of all of our own waste. So not only is that inspiring to me, it's amazing to me, it's also sobering to think, oh yeah, I rocked that boat. What is there? What's plan B? You look out into space, I don't see it, they're handy. So you think about that extraordinary system that's making it work, that supports us as people, that supports all the species on Earth. Again, it's just one of those realization moments to go, wow, what I do matters, really matters. And if this isn't going to work well for us, that's it. The gig's up. And so I ought to stop and think about it and again, make a conscious choice.
Thank you so much. We so appreciate you taking time to meet with us today. And we hope that we get to talk to you again soon.
Anytime.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you feel inspired to do something great. And thanks to Liiingo for sponsoring this podcast.
Liiingo is the most effective way to connect with customers in the moment they need you, deepen engagement that leads to dramatic results, and build communities so that your business continues to grow. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or at liiingo.com. See you there.